and welcome to the LSR Podcast, episode number 11. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gambling industry. This week, Eric Ramsey, Dustin Gowker, Adam Candy, all here. The gang is back together. I know we took a week off, but it was good because we have a lot to talk about, because the reason that our fellows were not on the podcast last week, because they were attending a conference and being all, important and everything over there. So we will certainly get a rundown of everything that went on over there. Of course, we are on iTunes, we are on Stitcher, we are on Spotify. So we would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review. We would very much appreciate all of that. Help us climb the ranks there and help people find this awesome podcast. Let's start things off here with what's going on in West Virginia. As you well know, West Virginia was going, West Virginia not going. Eric, where do we sit in the great state of West Virginia?
Matt, that was a suitably spirited introduction for the news we have out of West Virginia. Some good news for bettors there. It looks like DraftKings is going to launch their mobile app as soon as next week. We found out yesterday on Wednesday that they have finished their testing process. We got word from the lottery there that they are fully set to launch as soon as they are willing to do so. We also learned that there are no other apps in the testing process, but we expect a couple more coming behind them. FanDuel, for example, has a presence there, William Hill as well. So it looks like we're about to start into the next, the post-bet lucky phase of West Virginia sports betting here.
So, Dustin, for those of our listeners that are not incredibly familiar with what's going on in West Virginia, can you just give a Cliff Notes version of why we are so excited about DraftKings possibly launching there in West Virginia?
Yeah, like Eric alluded to, we once had online sports betting in West Virginia, and then we didn't. For, I guess, about 3 months, we had the Bet Lucky app, which was live, and then it wasn't live because of a dispute between a couple of companies that run the app for two of the casinos. So we've been in limbo land for online sports betting, and obviously DraftKings has done really well in New Jersey. People like the product there, so I think people should be rightfully excited that it's coming to West Virginia. I hate to try to guess what people are going to do as far as timing, but it does seem like this time next week you should be able to bet in West Virginia on the DraftKings app, if all things go according to schedule.
Now, I don't know. I have no idea what the Bet Lucky app looked like, but I can only imagine this is going to be a step up because, as we've mentioned several times on this podcast, the DraftKings app is very superior to most apps out there.
Yeah, it was nothing terribly special. Lifetime, it did about $600K in revenue. So, without having a good feel for the size of the market, I would expect DraftKings to eclipse that pretty quickly.
Adam, let's talk about New Hampshire. Do we have another state that we're going to be able to tick off here and maybe run down old Dustin Gowker's over-under here for 2019?
We have great news out of the state of New Hampshire. The sports betting bill there, House Bill 480, looks to be on its way to passage. It's an interesting situation. It was in the Senate. It had to bounce back to committee. That was out of an abundance of caution over some amendments that had to do with financial aspects of the bill. It's going to go back to the Senate floor next week, likely to be concurred with by the House, and then move on to the governor for signature. I mean, New Hampshire was not one of the states that we had at the top of the list at the beginning of the year, but I think we've been pleasantly surprised by a number of small to mid-sized states being able to get their situations together and get it passed. Some interesting things in the amendments added to this bill. Another state here that is being very cautious with its language with regard to the Wire Act and the DOJ opinion that we saw earlier this year, the language saying that mobile sports wagers must be initiated and received within the geographic borders of the state of New Hampshire and may not be intentionally routed outside the state. The incidental intermediate routing of mobile sports wagers is something that shall not determine the location of the wager. So even though state law has no effect on federal law, it's very interesting to see these new bills being put together in such a way that they're addressing the Wire Act concern. Other interesting piece I thought out of this was that the Lottery Commission has the ability to set daily, weekly, and monthly amounts for wager limits in relation to problem gaming. So interesting not to see that on the operator side in terms of setting limits, but giving the lottery the ability to set those caps. That could be an interesting discussion down the line, depending on how things shape up in New Hampshire. So, we could be looking at New Hampshire coming online here within the year, and that's great news because we might be able to make enough money to send Eric to get his car from New Hampshire.
There we go. I mean, Dustin, well, I'm going to let you be the judge and jury on this one. Adam came with abundance of caution. Is this good enough to make a T-shirt? Abundance of caution, or is
I
that just...
I like intermediate routing. I think some people would sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was when he spit out abundance of caution, I was kind of like, all right, this could possibly make the LSR T-shirt list here.
You just have to like the way I say it, right? Abundance of caution.
So we'll put like abundance with a hyphen and then of caution, and that's how we'll go with the shirt.
Dustin's the T-shirt expert here. I'm going to let him take over.
I keep promising to make these T-shirts. Someday it's going to happen.
It is. We are definitely going to get this going for sure. Now, Eric, we've talked a bit about Michigan has kind of popped up on our radar. It's kind of fallen off. It's popped up again. What is going on in Michigan?
Yeah, we have a state representative there, Brant Iden, who has sort of become a champion of gaming legislation for Michigan. He is the sponsor of an online gambling bill that is currently working through the legislature and now has a standalone sports betting bill to go alongside of it. It's actually not filed yet. We saw a draft last week and expect it to be filed next week, but we have a pretty good feel for what's included. It will allow the 23 tribal casinos and the 3 Detroit commercial casinos to offer sports betting, retail and online. There's a $200,000 application fee, $100K annually for the license. Taxes proposed at 8%. The bill stipulates 3 skins apiece. I can tell you that tax fee is very likely to change throughout the course of this the legislative process. It's been a big sticking point with his online gambling bill as well. They are very concerned about revenue in Michigan, so I'd be surprised if it holds at 8%. But yeah, expect to see this bill with decent prospects appear in short order in Michigan.
When you talk about Iden, and certainly I've seen his name pop up a ton here as being a champion for that. What is his big legalization points? There are some people who are going out on the look, it's happening anyway, so we might as well make it legal. Or there's some people who their big talking point is, look, we need the money. Let's get the money going here. What's the big talking point for him?
Not everyone who sponsors gaming legislation I would call a champion, but he seems to get it. He seems to understand the reasons. He has educated himself about this over several years, and he knows how to talk to lawmakers in a way that will appeal to their revenue, their obligation to drive revenue to the state, but also is very much understands the industry and that sports betting and online gambling are things that are adult choices that responsible adults should be able to make, and that sports betting is already happening. So he, from what I've seen, he does really seem to get it in the same way that the industry does.
Dustin, Illinois is a state that we said is certainly a state that we've kept an eye on very heavily. Of course, tons of pro and college sports teams that have big followings in that state here, but it looks like the time is running thin, huh?
I don't know what my coworkers here feel like, but if you gave me an over-under of 0.01%, I think I'd bet the under on the chances of Illinois passing sports betting this year. It seems like it's just a mess, which I think we could all see coming. Illinois politics is already a mess, and then you throw gaming into it, and there's just a zillion different interests in Illinois. We're currently a little over a week from when they're supposed to adjourn for the year. A bill hasn't really advanced. There's still several different versions that are being floated around, although we're down to apparently just 2 from the sponsor, Mike Zalewski. But I just don't see how Illinois is going to get done this year. I think we knew Illinois was going to be a mess, despite the fact that it sounded good early in the year. The governor put in his budget. There was actually some groundwork laid, but we seem really far away from getting something done.
Adam, you like to handicap from time to time. He has gone with the under on 0.01% chance. Where do you fall on this?
Here's the problem. I don't know where we're going to get our official data to grade this bet, because I would love to take a number like 5% just because Pritzker put the money into his budget and there is some motivation among the Democrats in the caucus to help out their new governor. So I would take the over on 0.1, probably the under on 5.1%. Not sure how we're going to get that together, though. There's two things that jump out at me in the Illinois bill. One, and we talked about this before, and I'll let Dustin kind of fill you in on the history here, but the biggest sticking point in Illinois at the moment is a so-called bad actor clause that would lock out DraftKings and FanDuel from being able to participate for up to 3 years, in large part based on their situations with DFS dating back into the middle of the decade. And Dustin can tell you more about that. And the other thing that's really interesting that needs to be noted is that Mike Saluski, the rep who's been pushing this bill, mentioned the fact that he put official league data in the bill in large part because Tennessee went out and became the first state to mandate official data for in-play betting. His quote, "Tennessee going on official league data is indicative to us that we might not be the first state. We could maybe survive that challenge." I wrote an article at Legal Sports Report talking about how bad the Tennessee bill is overall, and this right here is an example of why I said the Tennessee bill is so bad, because setting the precedent for official data and giving cover to other states to say, well, someone else did it, is the problem. Again, we have no problem with the league selling official data and marketing a product, but mandating it in law is a whole other thing, and that's another problem with what's going on in Illinois.
Eric, what are your thoughts here on Illinois?
Yeah, it's not. I think I probably would prefer that this doesn't happen this year the way it's currently set up. It's a lot like what we saw. We saw this play out last year, butting up against adjournment too, where we had just all of these proposals and all these stakeholders, all these cooks in the kitchen, and no one could figure out exactly what to cook. We're seeing that. The benefit last year is some of those proposals were actually decent. This year, none of what's on the table really looks very good and is broadly palatable, and just seems like maybe we're even further from the finish line than we were this time last year. Yeah, it's just nothing is great about that Illinois situation right now.
And Dustin, this bad actor clause here that Adam mentioned, of course, we've heard this pop up several different times in online poker talks here, but DraftKings and FanDuel being brought up in Illinois as bad actors is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and this goes back to me just starting to cover this. Actually, one of my earliest interviews on legislation was with Representative Zalewski, because he was one of the first people to introduce a daily fantasy sports bill to formally legalize it, and of course Illinois has never actually passed that legislation. We also have. I was also sitting around on Christmas Eve in 2015 writing about the Illinois Attorney General saying that she believed that daily fantasy sports was illegal gambling under state law. Now, all of that backstory and lobbying that's gone over the last 4 years has manifested itself in trying to keep DraftKings and FanDuel, which are obviously leaders in the New Jersey sports betting market, and trying to keep them out. This is this goes back to bad blood that's in the lobbying sphere on DFS, and was always going to raise its head in this as well. So I think the takeaway is it's bad policy. DraftKings and FanDuel, we can argue till the cows come home about whether it's gambling or not. There's never been a finding of fact that they were illegally operating in Illinois. The Attorney General opinion doesn't carry the weight of law. So it's a really ham-handed way to try to artificially suppress competition, I think is the takeaway here.
I've actually seen a couple of different people from Illinois come out, it seems like, that have some voices and actually in support of DraftKings and FanDuel, basically with the point being that the more competition, the better. And I think what we found here, and especially over in New Jersey, which is the real big case study that we have, is it actually is better for the consumer, because people are running all kinds of promotions. They're trying to acquire customers. They're doing all of these, refunds and different things. And I mean, it really does make it better for the people whenever you have more people involved.
Yeah, and you can also take issue with how much revenue you think it is that DraftKings and FanDuel bring, but it's not like in New Jersey, if you just took DraftKings and FanDuel away, that other operators would just fill that gap. That's some amount of their brand recognition, some amount of the marketing they've done. This is you don't just keep them out, and all of a sudden, everybody else gets 100% of the pie. They expand the pie, at least in the short term. Long term, you can argue that it won't matter. But if you want to hit a revenue estimate pretty early on, I think you kind of need those guys if you're really concerned about the revenue aspect.
Eric, we have time and time again falsely told people that we were just days or weeks away from there being an online launch in the state of Pennsylvania. We had Jess Wellman on the show, our guru for Pennsylvania, to have her talk about everything. Where we are getting this information, we have good sources, and then it keeps on getting bumped. Where do we sit in Pennsylvania as of right now? Are we going to continue to lie to our listeners?
No, I won't lie to you. I'll just tell you we really don't have any idea when this is all going to start. We, like you said, we do have pretty good connections there, and everyone seems to be eager. We're right on the cusp. The Gaming Control Board in I think mid-April was saying we were about 3 weeks out, so we're now about 5 or 6 weeks out from that, and it still hasn't happened. We honestly, maybe Dustin or Adam has some insight. I don't. We really don't know what the holdup is. Our best guess is maybe another week or two, but it is just guessing as far as I'm aware.
Adam, are you willing to go on record and lie to our listeners and tell them that they will have online sports betting and or casino in the near future in Pennsylvania?
I've been operating on the theory the whole time that George Costanza would endorse, that it's not a lie if you believe it. And we've believed it every time that this was really happening. I had a conversation yesterday with a spokesperson from the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board who said it'll be another week or two. We've heard some rumors behind the scenes of reasons why this has slowed down that makes sense. But at the same time, Pennsylvania, remember how long ago the law was passed. Remember how long it took for retail sports books to launch last year, even when we thought they were coming months earlier. So I think the word is caution in general in Pennsylvania, although maybe not in abundance.
We will keep you updated. And of course, playpennsylvania.com is one of our sister sites to Legal Sports Report. So you can certainly get all of the latest information at Play Pennsylvania, and every single time we hear a rumor, it will at least be posted on that site so we can keep you informed with everything that's going on there. Eric, we are finally here in Tennessee, right? I mean, this was one of those situations that we talked about where it was passed, might not necessarily actually get signed into law, but would become law anyway.
Yep, that is probably going to happen this weekend. As far as we know, we kind of touched on this bill a little bit earlier. We don't like this bill. It's not very good. It has a very high annual license fee, a 20% tax. There's that official data mandate that already has been cited in Illinois, which is frustrating. But yeah, it is on the governor's desk. He has until either Friday or Saturday to sign it. My math says Saturday. Some others are saying Friday, but one of those 2 days. We don't expect him to sign it. We do expect it to become law without a signature, and looks very likely that Tennessee will be the fourth state to legalize sports betting this year.
Now, Adam, having formerly worked in politics here, this is a really awesome way for someone to, if this goes badly, say, well, hey, I didn't sign this bill, and so you can't blame me. Or if it goes really, really well, he can jump up and down and say, hey, look, I let this become law, right? So this is like a no-lose situation.
I think for Governor Bill Lee, this is more of a moral question. There's been a lot of religious opposition in Tennessee to this bill. And you're right. If it goes south, he can say, don't blame me. And if it goes well, I don't think he says anything at all. I think he pretends like he was on the train the whole time, which is pretty typical for what you would expect in this situation. Again, the way this bill is set up, it's almost impossible for any operator to make a profit in Tennessee. That's $750,000 annual license fee with a 20% tax rate. I mean, even if you're DraftKings and FanDuel and you don't have a huge marketing spend to go into Tennessee, then you still are in a spot where it's going to be very difficult to work with the margins in sports betting to make profit down there. Remember also, it's an online-only bill in Tennessee, so if you are a company that does not have a built-in customer base, you have a huge spend coming on customer acquisition because you don't have an existing casino to draw from that player base. So unless you've had a huge DFS presence either there or somewhere close, it's going to be really challenging to build yourself up quickly in Tennessee with the upfront costs that are there as well, not even to mention the official league data and the ban on NCAA in-play wagers and all of the other things that make this thing a dud.
So, Dustin, whenever the Pennsylvania licensing fees and all of the tax rates and things came out, we were like, man, who in the hell is going to do this? There's no way anyone's going to do this. And for a while, people held off, and then there was the first one. Then there was the second one. And then everyone kind of got on board here. Are we going to see the same thing in Tennessee? Maybe maybe somebody just takes it as kind of a loss leader here to say, hey, we are in Tennessee. It is maybe they look at it as kind of like a marketing spend almost more than anything else, and be willing to just kind of lose money there in Tennessee just to say that they're there.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see DraftKings, FanDuel, presumably Will Hill. There's going to be companies that do this for sure, even though it's definitely going to be hard to make a ton of money on Tennessee. But just because you can just go get the license yourself, you're not working with a casino partner, all of that money's coming back to you. So that part's good. In Pennsylvania, there's the dynamic where the casino licensee is the one. So when you can get directly licensed, a little bit different story. It's still like Adam said, it's really expensive to try to do that. If you're and I think our argument continues to be that these high taxes and licensing fees, like they can drive revenue for sure, but they're also at the same time going to stop innovation in product. They're going to stop marketing. So you're probably handicapping the ceiling of your market. You can say, yes, we're getting more money from the upfront fees and taxes, but you might not be growing the market quite as much as you want. So it'll be interesting to see. I can't sit here and say beyond a shadow of a doubt Tennessee won't work, but there's definitely going to be companies that are going to be in.
Adam, we've looked at Colorado as kind of being a progressive state when it comes to some of the other issues that they voted on, and with the ballots and whatnot. Of course, you can even do, in some places, there is magic mushrooms that you can do without getting taken to jail and everything now. What about sports betting in Colorado? Some interesting stuff coming up there recently.
That was oddly specific, Matt Brown. I'm familiar with the marijuana legalization bill in Colorado, but magic mushrooms. Okay, I'll file that one away from your Super Mario days.
Hey, listen. If you follow Joe Rogan is very excited about this. I'll just put it that way. This would not have been on my radar, but I'm a Joe Rogan fan, and Joe Rogan is very excited about this. So I've read all the stuff about mushrooms in Colorado than I ever thought I would in my entire lifetime.
So basically, you're taking the Tennessee governor approach to this to be like, hey, I didn't put the rule in place, but I mean, if it's there, then yeah. Okay. Just checking to see how that's shaped up for you. Colorado's going to the ballot this fall. The state legislature a couple weeks ago, right before adjournment, approved a ballot question in which folks in Colorado are going to be asked whether or not to legalize sports betting statewide via mobile. It's an interesting situation. There's a law on the books called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that requires any tax increase in Colorado to go to the ballot. And part of that Taxpayer Bill of Rights, or for short TABOR, is that the question has to be phrased to the voters in a very odd way on the ballot. And so when you look on the ballot, it says, should taxes be raised $29 million to fund water projects and sports betting? That's not really what the situation is. Ultimately, those water projects are going to be funded by the tax proceeds from sports betting. So it's a strange way to word the question, but it is on the ballot. Voters in November in Colorado will have the opportunity to legalize sports betting. 10% tax rate is fairly reasonable when compared to other states. Keep in mind, Colorado does not have a history, despite its liberal bent on certain issues, of supporting widespread gaming. Casinos in the state are right now limited to 3 towns up in the Rocky Mountains, and this would be the by far biggest expansion of gambling in the history of Colorado. It moved through the legislature with relative ease. I would expect to see some fairly big marketing spend in terms of trying to get people to vote on this thing come the fall in terms of TV advertising and direct mail and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's the only way you're going to get this thing passed, right? I mean, if you don't explain that, no, listen, you're going to read this one way, but this is what it really means. There's going to have to be a lot of education process here.
There is, and to dig back into that political background we were talking about, Taxpayer Bill of Rights is something that's been in place in Colorado for 25 years. Really, over the past 2 decades, it's this sort of populist idea of letting the people decide about everything when it comes to taxes. Well, it also has its inefficiencies in which legislators need to sort of pass everything twice. They pass it at the legislature, and then they have to go pass it at the ballot. And the way it's set up, when the language looks the way that it does on the ballot, you're really making it as difficult as possible for any tax increase to go through. And that really is the concept for the folks who work to put the Taxpayer Bill of Rights in place.
Eric, it is not the greatest state in the union, but it is my home state in Louisiana, and it looks like we talked about DFS there, several podcasts ago. If you aren't familiar with how that went down, they did legalize DFS. It is on a parish-by-parish basis, and there were only a few parishes that did not vote it through, and the majority of the population is located in the main parishes, which did vote it through here. Louisiana now headed towards sports betting, I hear.
Matt, what is a parish? Is that like a county?
It is. It is.
Okay,
it is a county in Louisiana, and because of the heritage, and you got it. Yeah.
How much do you love when we talk about Louisiana? Yeah, that DFS bill we sort of thought was a trial run last year. That looks like it's coming to fruition. We've talked about this bill. It's making progress through the legislature. It would allow I think there's 16 casinos in New Orleans.
14 casinos in the state and several racetracks as well.
There you go, calling it New Orleans too as well. Apologies, in Louisiana. The 14 casinos in Louisiana could offer sports betting on site. It's the Mississippi mobile model where you could have mobile devices only on casino premises. And same as DFS, it'd be a parish by parish referendum. We would presume the parishes affected by this would probably pass it. And yeah, this has already cleared the House and cleared the Senate and making progress through the House. And really, we just don't see any hurdles to this. It looks like kind of a foregone conclusion that this will be on the ballot as well.
Yeah, I read some of the opposition that was going on there in the local papers, and it was kind of like laugh out loud funny because they were talking about how sports betting preys on poor people and everything, and this is a state, like we mentioned, with 14 casinos and every form of lottery that you can possibly have, but sports betting is what is preying on poor people. I think a lot of people just kind of saw right through that, and yeah, it looks like this is gonna, everything that I read as well, looks like this is going to kind of head right on through, and this is probably. Mississippi can be thanked for the people in Louisiana, really, because, with Mississippi going ahead and doing it, it almost really, really kind of sped this process up because they were like, hey, there are people driving across the border here to go do this whole sports betting thing when we can keep this money in state. So certainly looks like Louisiana is going to get there as well. Now, we talked about the I states. We almost devoted an entire podcast, Adam, to the I states very recently. Let's circle back around to a couple of these. What about Iowa?
Iowa recently became the third state to pass a sports betting law this year, signed by Governor Kim Reynolds after a couple weeks of deliberation. And this, when you look at the final product, is one of the most reasonable bills that has passed anywhere. A lot of compromise in this bill. Everyone gets what they want. And also, this is one that could fire up pretty quickly. We're already starting to hear about partnerships with casinos that were all set up in Iowa, ready to go. But 6 3/4 tax rate, mirroring what happens in Nevada, $45,000 license fee. Mobile is allowed up to 2 skins per licensee. The only thing that I think the industry at large might not be thrilled with, in-person registration required until January 1st, 2021. It'll be regulated by the Racing and Gaming Commission. But we already see that DraftKings, FanDuel, Will Hill, PointsBet, all getting into the Iowa market. There are plenty of opportunities in Iowa, almost a couple dozen casinos in Iowa for partnerships to form up. So Iowa could be one of the first to launch in 2019 after being the third to pass behind Montana and Indiana.
Now, Dustin, just in case there are people out there that are not quite familiar, can you give, again, a Cliff Notes version of whenever Adam says something about that 2 skins are allowed per license. Can you let everybody know exactly what that means?
Yeah, we use skins. It's a little industry term, but it basically means you can have more than one brand operate under your license. So, for instance, New Jersey, DraftKings is a skin under the resorts license. They are allowed to operate, and there's several other online sportsbooks that do so as well under a single license. So it's just a fancy name for a way to let other brands that don't have a casino license into the state, and it's capped in the state, but I think, and obviously talk Tennessee, there's a more wide open model, and that's not even skins on a license. That's just people can come in and do it. So it's industry jargon, but yeah, we're just going to see more than one brand under different licensees.
Eric, we talked about Montana having about 57 different bills that were going on over there in Montana. Where do we sit as of May the 23rd?
Yeah, the one that passed is very much not like Iowa, unfortunately. There will be no short-term competition in Montana. The 2 that made it to the governor, he only signed 1. He vetoed the one that would have allowed sort of an open model via taverns and bars and things like that in the state. The one that he signed is the lottery model. It's going to be operated by Intralot, and actually got a chance to see their sports betting product at the conference last week, and it is both beautiful from a cosmetic perspective and really frightening for the prices bettors look like they're going to get. So Intralot is going to be operating sports betting in Montana probably in the near future, it looks like.
When you say frightening, are we talking about the juice was heavy, huh?
Well, I'll tell you couldn't even see the juice. The machine was sort of, like I said, it's beautiful, sort of built like a soda vending machine with a big touch screen on the front, and doesn't show the prices, just shows your bet amount and your win amount. And you're doing the implied calculations. We're looking at some really huge margins there. So an appealing product that will draw people's eyes. But if you look sort of underneath the hood, there's a really bad value for the betting community there.
I'm sure this will go over well with sports betting Twitter, Dustin.
I'm sure it will.
I'm sure all the people that love to tweet at you will love what's going on in Montana. Yeah,
and Eric's little picture of the Intralot thing went a little bit viral. I saw a lot of people kind of commenting on it. I saw it on LinkedIn too. It is a good looking product, I have to say. Seeing it in person too, but yeah, it's kind of laughable what they're actually trying to sell with this, and how exactly they're going to do that. So.
All right, our final I state here, Adam. Indiana, the fine people of the Hoosier State. What can we tell them about sports betting?
We can ask them who's your bookie. Thank you. This passed about 2 weeks ago. Yep, this was signed about 2 weeks ago in Indiana. Indiana and Iowa will likely be racing to the start line here in 2019 for getting legal sports betting going. This bill had to walk an interesting path. This bill started with mobile, then had mobile stripped out in House committee to get past an unfriendly committee chairman, and then had to be added back in conference committee. So basically the last possible step, mobile reappeared. And this was the plan all along. It was executed beautifully. You're looking at a bill with statewide mobile, 9.5% tax rate, $100,000 license fee with $50,000 renewal payments. The official data was initially in there. It was pulled out by Senator Messmer. So again, much like Iowa, our I states, other than Illinois, have come through with a couple of reasonable bills, and our folks over in that I state might want to take a look at what's going on and see if they want to model something after it.
Good to cap things off with some good news here. You know, I like when we end with the good news as opposed to like, yeah, actually we hate this bill. Let's move on to the next story. I like when we wrap up the state wrap. You know.
Matt, I'm not going to lie. I did sort of redo the rundown to make sure that we were in a happy place here because it's Thursday and we got to wind the week down feeling good about ourselves.
I like it. Well done, sir. Well done. Now, Dustin, the reason we did not have a podcast last week is the three of you were off over in Boston at ICE. I believe you even presented over there. Can you tell us a little bit what went on down in Boston?
Yeah, I can do that. This was another big conference where it was not just a sports betting conference. This was a larger gaming conference, but not shockingly, since this is in America and it's about gaming, so there was a lot of sports betting. So I did present. We talked a little bit about our business and what we do for anybody who's curious about that. And yeah, it was, it's just interesting to see the amount of interest in this. This is actually a European brand that's coming over and trying to, again, get on the conference circuit and get people coming. There were a lot of people there, and there were a lot of panels and a lot of booths dedicated to sports betting. It was designed just to be anything that's going on in North America, but it's the focus is irrefutably on sports betting, and had a lot of people talking about, same thing that we heard the last conference. There's a lot of official data talk, a lot of not as much integrity fees this time around, but the official data was definitely there. And there's a lot of talk about of how the United States market's going to shake out and where we are, because we're still in early days. We feel like we've been doing this forever, but we're really only a year in, and it came about a year after PASPA fell. So interesting to be there. I don't know if any of us have any great insights. I think Adam and Eric listened to more of the panels than I did, but it is interesting just to see just how much interest there is in this stuff.
Eric, you mentioned one of the kiosks that you were able to go around and play with. Was there any other things that you messed around with that you found either neat or not so neat?
Everyone brought their kiosks out, as we tend to see at the gaming conferences. And I'll tell you, I think you and I were standing next to each other a couple months ago at a conference looking at the SB Tech kiosk. Yes. And it is still by far the best product I've seen. For what that's worth, whoever's out there using the SB Tech kiosks looks like they have the best product. The same takeaways as Dustin, a big focus on sports betting, also attracted some sort of peripheral gaming things like VR setups and sort of like escape room things and stuff like that. But big focus on sports betting. Lots of conversation about data. That has become the hot button issue between the leagues and the industry, even more than the fees. I noticed that as well.
Adam, of all the information and or sites that you soaked in, does anything stand out?
A few things jumped out at me at ICE. One of them being a discussion that we listened to on tribal gaming. I think there's a lot going on in this space that is misunderstood in terms of how Native American tribes are approaching sports betting. I think you're going to hear a lot about that in the upcoming days and months. We have a piece coming up at Legal Sports Report with our legal expert, John Holden, kind of looking at the issue of how tribes set their compacts up with states and how sports betting might or might not fit into those. In terms of being on the floor and looking at what's around, I think you're seeing the kiosks in large part because we're hearing that in states where retail is a big deal, that kiosks are becoming more and more popular. People don't want to deal with people. They want to go up to the machine and not be embarrassed if they don't know exactly what their bet is, and they want to avoid having to talk to another human being. And because it's 2019 and anything we can do to avoid having to deal with another human is something that's going to gain popularity. So ultimately, the conference floor wasn't huge. There weren't a lot of new vendors pitching anything that in particular we hadn't seen before. But I think there was something very interesting to see with the prevalence of the kiosks and what we've heard anecdotally about what they have meant to retail sports books thus far.
Yeah, I think it was one of the things that is probably most surprising to me is that there isn't more talk about these things, because when I first saw them, I thought this was going to be massive, to be perfectly honest. I thought it was going to be huge. And you mentioned the whole person-to-person thing, and yeah, you don't have to do that, but also just from a casual bettor / new bettor perspective, there's a lot of intimidation factor that goes into walking into a sports book, and you know that most of the people in there have done this before, and they're using jargon and terms, and they're slinging money around and whatnot, and you don't really know what you're doing. You're afraid to say the wrong thing. You're afraid to make the wrong bet. You don't know exactly which teams right off the top of your head you want to parlay, and even how to say that you want to parlay this and that and the other. And I think with the kiosks, you're able to walk up and you can kind of just figure it out on your own. You can kind of just do it. It's a trial and error almost process. And so I don't know. I think as this expands, I think these kiosks are actually going to play a bigger role. Like you alluded to. I think they're going to play an even bigger role than we're even thinking.
And I think you have to remember also, it's not just the consumer friendliness angle. The kiosks can end up driving higher margin business for operators as well, because you can use that kiosk to ask more about parlays. You can try to suggest other wagers. You can try to do things that gets the casual average bettor to either play more or play bets that are much more in favor of the house.
Also a good way to, manage your staff if you're an operator. And we saw, at Meadowlands when we were there recently, that is a very successful sports book. The venue downstairs is beautiful, but throughout the entire property, there are banks of kiosks. So you can just, anywhere you are on that property, you don't have to go down to the sports book to bet. There's a kiosk within your line of sight. So it makes a really good complementary product to a retail sports book.
So as we move into the main story here, Dustin, this is something you've been following longer and closer than just about anybody. Of course, DraftKings, whenever they came into the market and took the DFS industry by storm, all of the, where the money was coming from, all of the investors, all the things like that. You've been on top of that since day one here as we move into the sports betting realm. Fox getting in bed with the Stars group. Here we have DraftKings coming up with a very, very major marriage here.
Yeah, and it's kind of under the radar. Yeah, and I've been tracking, once upon a time, my job was mostly about DraftKings and FanDuel and where their funding was coming from. That's wild to think about. That used to be the main focus. But so when Fox, the start of the story is Disney bought a bunch of what used to be 21st Century Fox. Obviously, a lot of the movie franchise is the big part of it. Fox still remains as a company that is Fox Sports and Fox News and things like that. But in this bigger Disney 21st Century Fox deal, the DraftKings equity that Fox had acquired as part of a funding round back in 2015. That went to Disney, which means that Disney, which is, pretty famously has not been a big proponent of gambling, and ESPN under the umbrella of Disney now owns some amount of stake in DraftKings. Back in 2015, when Fox Sports led a $300 million round, that was at 11%. I don't know what that percentage is of the company now with everything that's happened between now and then. So, but it still remains that Disney/ESPN, right as this, as of when I wrote the story earlier this week and confirmed with DraftKings, owns a piece of DraftKings, which is a sports betting operator. So it's really interesting. It comes again as media plays are a big part of what's happening in sports betting, and it's kind of unclear exactly how much interest Disney and ESPN have in this. If this was just a kind of a tag along on the larger deal, if ESPN's really interested. So yeah, a lot of questions that be answered, but it is interesting that this relationship exists now.
Now, Adam, Disney has come out and at least put out some sort of quote now referencing this, right? I saw something from representatives at Disney that they said at least they acknowledged that, yes, they do own a piece of DraftKings and that they do not want to be a book, but they will just focus on content, right?
This is a strange situation overall. I mean, it was under the surface to begin with, and now it's being acknowledged. We heard very clearly from Bob Iger on the Q1 investor call that the ESPN was not going to get directly involved, and now here it is. We've speculated on this a little bit. I wonder, even though we're talking about content, I still wonder if this is just an asset that ESPN decided to get in on and maybe have to be able to flip at some point later, because it doesn't make a lot of sense overall. We know that there is some tie-up already between the companies, but to see that expanding, some have talked about even potentially a purchase in the end. I just don't see where that ultimately happens. I don't see where a company like Disney, with the money that it has, with the cash flow that it has, wants to go down this road with, it's been very protective of its brand over time. So I think we're only at the very, very beginning stages of hearing about this.
Yeah, Eric, this is kind of something that what Adam just mentioned is the first thing that came to my mind was if you're being honest when you come out and say that you want nothing to do with being on the actual sports book side of things and actually booking things, that this little piece of DraftKings doesn't make a ton of sense. If you're really only going to focus on content and and whatnot. I mean, you're going to want to be able to take sponsorship dollars from anybody that you can take sponsorship dollars from. You want to take ad dollars from anybody you can take ad dollars from. And, you know, if you're working against your own interest a little bit because you own a piece of one of the sports books and things, it almost feels like, yeah, it was just a throw in that maybe will be spun off at some point.
It almost has to be the number, you know, the question we're all asking ourselves is why would Disney take a stake in this company if they had no intention of using it, essentially, or were sort of embarrassed about having it. To play devil's advocate, it would make a hell of a lot of sense if they wanted to get into sports betting to do it along a path like this. You know, they've already sort of, ESPN is brushing up against or really doing more than brushing up against with that deal with Caesars to have a broadcast studio at the link. You know, if you're a big broadcast company like a Fox or an ESPN looking for a sports book to attach your name to, you hear DraftKings would be probably the top candidate. So it would make a lot of sense from a business standpoint, but conceptually and just the company ethos that we know from Disney, it would be really surprising to see them fully jump into sports betting like that. Now,
Dustin, this is certainly something I think that you and I have talked about offline, you know, over the course of the years, not necessarily anytime recently, but, you know, ESPN, Disney keeps coming out and saying, you know, we want no part of being a book. We don't want to be a book. We don't want to be a book. We don't want to take your money. We don't want to be a part of all that. And then that being said, you kind of look at it from the flip side and say, if they did, I mean, am I out of bounds in saying that, like, as soon as they announced it, they would instantly be the market leader? I mean, is there anything bigger? There's nothing bigger in sports than the brand of ESPN other than the NFL itself, you know, one of the actual leagues. If you're talking about anything outside of an actual league, there's nothing bigger in sports than ESPN. And if you had ESPN Sportsbook or ESPN Bet or whatever in the hell it would be called, I feel like from day one, they enter as the market leader.
ESPN, I mean, you're right. ESPN Sportsbook powered by DraftKings or DraftKings Sportsbook powered by ESPN, whatever that, if you did that, that would be like, I don't know, everybody else could shut it down. They're going to destroy everyone. Fox Bet looks like child's play compared to that. That being said, I agree with these guys that we're not anywhere near that. It's just the fact that this came out is not, you know, saying that that's where we're headed here. I really don't have a real grasp on why this came out and what it did, other than it's weird because the 21st Century Fox deal isn't new, and DraftKings, you know, equity as part of that deal is a really small part of it. It's really if you don't have plans for it, it's really just a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. So it's all really interesting. And, you know, you go back in the history too, you know, when Fox stepped in and led that round for DraftKings. Before that, it was being reported that ESPN wanted to lead that round for $250 million. They were going to be invested in DraftKings, and then for whatever reason, it's never been exactly reported the why on that. ESPN/Disney got cold feet and never ended up actually holding it. So that's the other interesting part, is that ESPN had a chance to be in on the ground floor and DraftKings back when it was just daily fantasy. Now we're in the world of sports betting. But I agree. If ESPN Sportsbook would immediately crush everybody. So if ESPN wants to get into it, they'd probably be great at it, and it would make a ton of sense from a lot of standpoints. But I don't know if, as we sit here, we can say that's what's going to happen or even a likely scenario.
Yeah, I think as long as they, you know, toe the line here, it'd be pretty weird for them to make an abrupt turn. But I don't know. It feels like maybe 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, something like that. I mean, God, it just, I don't know. Seems like a no-brainer, but maybe that is just something they have absolutely no interest in, and really and truly mean it when they say they have absolutely no interest in it. Guys, we have had a ton of news to talk about. Of course, we take 1 week off and we have to catch everybody up on all of these states that are going on here and all the biggest news. But of course, you can find this on the daily at legalsportsreport.com. You can follow on Twitter at LSP Report as well. So be sure and do that. And you certainly want to be following these three guys because they are the smartest in the business when it comes to this stuff. So at Eric_Ramsey, at Dustin Gauker, and at Adam Candy, 2 E's.
I have an update. If you go to my Twitter, you can find T-shirts for #integrity fees and #weaponized data. I'm taking pre-orders even as we speak.
There we go.
Yes.
I love this. This is what this podcast is all about. I mean, just a free-flowing little thing here. And I mean, this is, Adam, you really did set this up to end on a happy note.
I did, and I just want to make clear to Dustin Gauker that since weaponized data is mine, I will be taking an integrity fee off every sale.
You're getting you'll get royalties. It is yours.
I agree. I'm here. I'll be the judge on that one, and I say yes on that. Guys, we are on iTunes. We are on Stitcher. We are on Spotify. So please go in, subscribe, rate, and review. Let us know everything that's going on, and we really, really do appreciate all of those 5-star reviews. For Adam, for Eric, for Dustin, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.